middle of the Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles from Hawaii, lay an island few people had heard of, Tinian. To the Japanese, it was nothing more than a speck of land, a forgotten dot in the vast ocean, and certainly no threat. They never imagined that hidden there was an airfield unlike any they had seen before, one so secret that it was whispered about only in the corridors of Allied command. The year was 1944. The Pacific War had reached a stage where every inch of land mattered. Every island was either a fortress for the Japanese or a prize for the Americans. The challenge was simple in words, but deadly in execution. To reach Japan, the U.S. needed a base close enough for bombers, but far enough to remain safe from attack. Tinian, a small island in the Marianas, became the answer. But building an airfield on Tinian was no simple task. The island was covered with dense jungles, coral beaches, and swamps. Japanese patrols could appear at any time, and the weather was unpredictable, often turning the terrain into mud that swallowed men and equipment alike. Yet the engineers who arrived on Tinian had one goal: to make the impossible possible. The first teams of American Seabees, naval construction battalions, landed quietly under strict secrecy. Their mission wasn't just to build runways. They had to create a fortress that could support hundreds of bombers, thousands of men, and a war effort that could change the course of history. Every coral reef they cleared, every jungle tree they felled, was a step toward a goal so audacious that it seemed almost unbelievable. Meanwhile, the Japanese had no idea. Their reconnaissance missions either missed the island entirely or reported it as a minor base with minimal activity. They laughed at the idea that Americans could build a massive airfield in such secrecy. To them, Tinian was just another Pacific outpost, a place for patrols and coconut trees, not a launch pad that would decide the fate of a nation. The Seabees worked day and night, moving massive amounts of coral, sand, and steel. Runways were carved into the landscape with precision, designed to handle the heaviest bombers. Hangars were constructed in secret, camouflaged to appear like ordinary buildings from the air. Roads, fuel depots, barracks, and control towers rose from the earth almost overnight. By the time the Japanese realized anything, it was too late. Radio operators and intelligence officers added another layer to the deception. False messages were sent to confuse Japanese spies, making Tinian seem unimportant. Dummy planes were parked along fake runways to mislead aerial reconnaissance. From above, Tinian looked like a sleepy outpost, while below, the island hummed with construction, manpower, and the invisible pulse of war. By early 1945, Tinian had transformed into the largest and most advanced airbase in the Pacific. Its runways could handle B-29 super fortresses, each carrying bombs heavy enough to flatten entire cities. The Americans had pulled off a feat of engineering and secrecy that even their allies found hard to believe. And then, the world changed. The airfield on Tinian became the launch point for missions that would bring the war to Japan's doorstep. Planes rolled down the runways with engines roaring, carrying not just bombs, but the weight of history itself. The Japanese, still believing Tinian was insignificant, had no idea that the very place they ignored would become the stage for the final act of the Pacific War. Every pilot who took off from Tinian knew the stakes. These weren't ordinary bombing missions. They were missions that could end the war, but also risked everything. And yet, the men of Tinian carried on, knowing their safety depended on secrecy, discipline, and the absolute belief that their work mattered. From the coral beaches to the jungle edges, the island had become more than land. It was a fortress, a lifeline, and a secret weapon. America had created a place the enemy never saw coming, a base so incredible that Japan assumed it was a myth. The success of Tinian wasn't just in its construction, it was in the meticulous planning, the deception, and the courage of men who worked unseen, unheard, and unheralded. They had taken an impossible dream and turned it into a reality that would change the course of history forever. As the first B-29s lifted off, heading toward Japan, the invisible army of engineers, pilots, and intelligence officers could only watch and wait. Their work had created the foundation, but the outcome would now depend on those who carried the mission forward. In the shadows of the Pacific, on an island the Japanese never took seriously, America had built a myth, and that myth was about to become a force the world would never forget.
The sun rose over Tinian, casting long shadows across runways that had once been dense jungle. The island, now transformed, hummed with life, a perfect blend of engineering, strategy, and human determination. B-29 superfortresses lined the airfield, their silver fuselages gleaming, engines idling, ready to carry out missions that would decide the fate of the Pacific War. For the Japanese, the existence of this airfield was still a rumor. Reports from reconnaissance planes trickled back to Tokyo, nothing significant seen. Yet the reality was far more terrifying. Tinian had become the central hub for America's strategic bombing campaign, a place the Japanese high command had ignored, and it was about to strike at the heart of their empire. Pilots ran final checks on their planes, climbing into cockpits with a mixture of tension and determination. They understood the weight of what they carried: bombs designed to destroy, missions intended to end a war, and the knowledge that every mile they flew brought them closer to danger. Yet above all, they trusted Tinian, the invisible fortress that had made this possible. The first missions took off under strict secrecy. The engines roared, the ground crews waved them off, and the island that Japan thought was unimportant had already become a pivot on which history would turn. From Tokyo to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, America's reach extended farther than Japan had imagined, all thanks to an airfield built in silence. Meanwhile, back on Tinian, the men who had built the runways, the hangars, and the roads worked tirelessly, maintaining the base with meticulous care. Engineers patched cracks in the concrete, fueled planes, and coordinated logistics for the next wave of flights. Every person understood that the airfield was more than just a construction project. It was a weapon. Not one that fired bullets, but one that projected power, strategy, and inevitability. As missions continued, Japan finally began to realize the magnitude of the deception. They had underestimated the Americans' ability to build a massive base under the noses of enemy reconnaissance planes. Panic rippled through the high command as their defenses were revealed to be in the wrong places, their troops spread thin, and their cities increasingly vulnerable. The myth they had ignored had become a reality that threatened to collapse their empire. The human cost on Tinian was immense. The men who had built the runways, the hangars, and the roads worked tirelessly, maintaining the base with meticulous care. Engineers patched cracks in the concrete, fueled planes, and coordinated logistics for the next wave of flights. Every person understood that the airfield was more than just a construction project. It was a weapon. Not one that fired bullets, but one that projected power, strategy, and inevitability. As missions continued, Japan finally began to realize the magnitude of the deception. They had underestimated the Americans' ability to build a massive base under the noses of enemy reconnaissance planes. Panic rippled through the high command as their defenses were revealed to be in the wrong places, their troops spread thin, and their cities increasingly vulnerable. The myth they had ignored had become a reality that threatened to collapse their empire. The attacks that followed shocked Japan and the world. Cities that had once seemed untouchable were reduced to devastation. Yet the story of Tinian remained largely unknown outside military circles. The airfield had done its job perfectly, enabling missions that ended the war while remaining almost invisible to the enemy. Years later, when historians pieced together the events, Tinian's significance became clear. The Japanese had been tricked, misled, and outmaneuvered without ever fully understanding how or why. America had built a base in secret on an island that seemed insignificant and turned it into the fulcrum of victory in the Pacific. Veterans who had served on Tinian often remained silent about their experiences. They had seen the construction from nothing, watched the first planes take off, and understood that the airfield's success had relied on secrecy as much as skill. They had fought a war in plain sight, yet their battles were invisible to everyone except the enemy. Even decades later, the lessons of Tinian endure. It is a story of ingenuity, courage, and the quiet power of planning. It is a reminder that victory is not always won by the largest army or the heaviest weapons. Sometimes, it is won by those who see possibility where others see impossibility, by those who act in silence while shaping history. The island that Japan thought was a myth had done the unimaginable. It had become the stage for missions that ended a global conflict, saving countless lives and demonstrating the extraordinary capabilities of American engineering and strategy. As the sun set over Tinian, the island returned to its natural silence. The runways remained, a testament to what human determination could achieve. The B-29s were gone, the bombs dropped, the war over. Yet the story of the invisible triumph of Tinian lived on for those who knew where to look. America had built a myth, a fortress of ingenuity and secrecy, and in the end, that myth had broken an empire, changed a war, and proven that even in the most desperate times, vision and courage could rewrite history. The island that Japan never saw coming had become a legend. It was invisible, unstoppable, and unforgettable.